Hello, good evening. Well, good afternoon, yeah. Thank you for coming to the last session of the day. I've been told I am the person between you and the bar. So I will say, if you do have any questions, please ask as we go through. You can ask me directly. Somebody will pass you a microphone. You can also do them through the app, and the nice lady at the back will take the questions and we'll go from there. I think that's about it for bits you need to know. My name's Iain Bray. I'm a senior sales engineer and I work for the core database group. I'm actually based in the UK, as you might tell from the accent. But I cover international customers, so both in the US and abroad, like Scandinavia, the UK, Africa and such like. What we're going to talk about is the InterSystems API Manager. Quick show of hands, just to make sure you're still awake at this time of day. Who's ever used an API Manager? Oh, damn. I was hoping it was going to be nobody. Very few people, so that means I've got mainly an open audience to talk to. Okay. By the way, is this echoing? Because it's certainly... We're getting an echo. Is that better? No. Yes? Yeah, okay. Oh, whatever. So a quick agenda, we're going to look at, do you need an API manager? What is it? What are we going to offer you in terms of the InterSystems API Manager? How important is it? Quite often people come up with fantastic answers to the question that's not been asked. So let's try and figure out what the use case was and what the question was in the first place. Why is this here? The architecture of how it's going to fit in, the control it gives you. We're going to do a demo. The demo worked 30 minutes ago. So, all being well, it will work in about 20 or 30 minutes. And then a summary and questions at the end. But if you do have questions as we're going along and you feel that you want to ask, please do so. Okay. So, why do you need an API manager? So, the times they are changing. Anybody who's old enough to remember who sang that? Okay. Thank you. Whoever said Dylan. The world is no longer standalone. I mean, I remember when I first started, there was such a thing called a turnkey system. You bought a computer, you loaded the application on, you took it to the customer and you turned it on, and that was their computer and that ran their business. Doesn't really exist anymore. The world is now connected, and your applications can give greater value if they're available to other users, because there's functionality in there and there's data in there and it's been built up over a long time. And let's face it, the application isn't going to be there if it wasn't useful. So you do need to have information about what people are doing on your system, what's happening to it, who's using it, when, where, and why. And you need to have some control over that. What's going on. So use cases. And some of these are real, in fact, they're all real use cases. But let's say you've got an existing application and it's got APIs for Fire because it's a clinical application. And they're going to be really useful, but the last thing you need is your main application grinding to a halt because the world and his wife are now talking to your APIs. And the response times are going through the floor. So you have a choice of either you control that or you disable the APIs in the first place. You've got existing clients using your APIs, but who's using what? Some APIs aren't being used. That may be because nobody knows they're there. That's one of the symptoms that you'll find. Or it may be that they are there, but nobody thinks they're that useful. How many times do you know something's gone wrong before somebody tells you it's gone wrong? your support desk will get a telephone call to say, it doesn't work anymore. Isn't technology great? We don't have the screen resolution we wanted and the microphone's a bit echoey, but don't worry. So health checking, the ability to know that your APIs aren't working at the same time as everybody else finds out and before the phone call starts happening. Updates and changes to the system can be complex, prone to issues. Onboarding of clients. Onboarding seems to be a new word. Somebody had to explain it to me. But it's actually getting customers to use things, getting them on board with your system, and actually explaining to them what your system does and how to talk to it. And yeah, that takes time. And the developers out there don't know which APIs are available, and they don't know how to configure, to use them, or to test them. So we'll come on to those. So what's the InterSystems API Manager? Well, it provides the following. Authentication. You can now centralize the authentication of everybody who's coming into all your systems, if you so wanted. And there's a whole series of the types of authentication you can have, and we'll look at some of them as we go through this. Traffic control. Going back to the issue whereby you've got a great application with great APIs, but you don't want to kill it by too much traffic, so you can limit that and make sure that it's still useful, but it carries on being useful. Analytics, to make sure you can monitor what's going on. Logging, so you can store it and go back to it later. And versioning. So we'll see it as we go through the demo, but you have an API, and it's version 1.0. 0.0, because we're computer people, we like long numbers. And then you come out with a different version, let's call it 1.0.1, because we're imaginative. And you need to make sure that your clients out there are talking to the right version. So we'll see that as we go through. Okay, so throughout InterSystems history, and we're talking about 40 years, what we've tried to do is to kind of keep it simple, keep it reliable, and keep it fast. And we're applying those same concepts to the API manager. So it's the ability for API creation, which we'll see, consuming APIs, the scalability, and the security. And without the last two, nobody is going to want to know about it. So how important is this? I mean, does anybody out there actually care about it? Yes. This is the Magic Quadrant from Gartner, and you probably know that Gartner come up with a whole library of Magic Quadrants on every subject you can think of, but this one's about API management, and there were some major players in there. I don't know if you can see it on the screen there, but you've got people like Google, IBM, all kinds of people, Amazon, all playing in this space, and they wouldn't be in this space if they didn't think it was important in the first place. So architecture, where does this all fit within where we are? Okay, time for the scary drawing. This is quite often what the world looks like. On the left-hand side, you've got a whole list of client users, devices, the whole works. And on the right-hand side, you've got all your systems. My local hospital admitted to me that they have in excess of 130 different applications. They're not quite sure what they all do, but they all seem to work. And that apparently is a small number. They're quite disciplined. Kind of scary, it's my local hospital, but it's that kind of issue you're facing. You've got all these applications out there and lots of different people talking to them. You may have already done something like this. You may have put an integration engine in, and if you're going to put an integration engine in, it's obviously from InterSystems. So it's going to be IRIS for Health, or IRIS itself, or Health Connect, something like that. And what that does is it's taken care of some of the traffic, some of the noise, but you're still left with other systems that aren't necessarily part of that environment and part of that infrastructure. And what you're still left with are developers who don't know what they're talking to, and administrators who don't really know what's going on because there's no control over what's happening. And what you're aiming for is this, where the administrators have access to a portal where they can see what's going on and they can control who does what. You have an API gateway to make sure that everybody's going through the same single point in order to get your applications. And a developer portal so that the technical people can actually see the APIs available that you're publishing and know how to talk to them and how to test against them. In terms of setup, you can make it really simple. Consumer, call it a user, call it a device, it's something that consumes services on the other side. And you specify the route, remember route, not root, to get from one to the other. And that's pretty much all that it entails. You have a service, and you have people who consume it, and you specify how they get there. You can make it slightly more complex because your services may be on a high availability stack where you've got many systems, and in case one fails, all the others are still there. So you can have what they call upstream with a balancer, and we've said ring balancer here. There are other types of balancers available. But in terms of accessing those systems and going through them. So really simple, like we said, we've concentrated on keeping things simple and secure and reliable and fast. Control. You need to know who's doing what and how they're doing it. One of the first things that people ask about in terms of control is API versions. So obviously time doesn't stand still. I keep modifying my API because it needs to do more things, clever things and such like as the world comes in. So you might start off with a fairly simple client to service approach, version 1. And anybody who recognizes those images is giving their age away again. I was looking for something that said kapow at the same time, but you know. Things change. Okay, so we're moving on to version 2. Apparently that's Val Kilmer for those who don't recognize it. And then with a different client on the other side. And so on through different versions. You can have as many versions as you like. And in fact, you can go on to unreleased to and development type versions to be completed. Now you see here that the version control is actually embedded in this URL, but you can put it in the header as well. Don't forget, these are basically HTTP calls. You're doing gets and posts and things. So it can go in the header. And there are pros and cons to using both. We don't care. All we're doing is we're forwarding the request onwards. Okay. Given all those different versions, you could actually have some analytics in terms of which versions are in use. You know, is version 1 still being used? And if so, why? And can't we move them off? You'll hear quite a lot of talk about plugins, just to explain where the plugins come in. At the moment, we have in excess of 40 plugins doing various bits with the API manager. Why use plugins? Out of the box, without any plugins, it's lightweight, it's fast, and you only need to add in the plugins that you need to make your job work. So you might need to add a security plugin, you might need to add a throttling plugin, you might not want all the other stuff that's in there. So you're removing all the waste and all the fat, keep it lean and simple. Okay. Examples, authentication. So there's a plugin, well, a series of plugins for authentication and security, traffic control. We'll see some of these as we go through. Serverless, analytics, transformations. There's a whole series of things you can do with this. And to give you an example, there's some of the icons you'll see. And these are all available through the administrative portal of the InterSystems API Manager. And it's point and click. For those people who like using a terminal, you can do it from the terminal as well, particularly if you're used to Linux, Unix, OS X. I believe you can do it from PowerShell in Windows, never tried. Never got there. Let's look at throttling. So going back to the example of, we've got this great application, we've got some APIs that we want to expose, we don't want the system going unresponsive on us. And it could be because you've got a great application, people want to use it. So you can control traffic by a whole number of things, whether it's the application ID, because everything's given an ID in the system, the service that you're providing, the route, the user ID, IP addresses, and such like. You can limit in terms of how many calls you can make for each of those periods, year, month, week, day, minute, second, etc. Okay. So yes, it can come into the web browser, or you can do it through the script. You probably can't read that too much, but we will see it as we go through. But yes, you can issue a curl from the terminal if that's what you like doing. Don't worry if you don't. Do it from a browser. I prefer the browser because I can never remember what to type, but that's right. Deployments. There's this thing called blue-green deployment. And if you imagine at the moment that blue is the live system, it's running, green is the new version that you're about to bring onto live, and you can switch from one to the other with the API manager. So you simply change where things are going. And you can issue a call, and it will change the service, and you start using the green system, blue-green deployment. It's Big Bang, right? We were using that, and now we're using this. People who've been in IT for a while are kind of cautious about Big Bang things. Some of us have had our fingers burnt. So there's another thing called Canary Releases. And what Canary Releases allows you to do is to slowly kind of shift from blue to green. So if you look at this, the weight involved is 1,000 on blue and nothing on green, so it's all heading for blue. And then you can slowly change the weight over, so you're moving some users onto green, which gives you the chance to make sure that A, it works, you've got enough licenses, the CPUs aren't burning out, and so on and so forth, until you've gradually moved everything over from one to the other. Okay. And again, you can do it through the UI or by a script call. Okay. Security. Is anybody here for the previous thing on security? Yeah, a couple of people. Right. So you've got all these applications, and if you're in a hospital, you've got over 130 applications. This is a way of being able to centralize all the security for all your applications at one point. Now, you may want to use OAuth 2. You may want to use TLS 1.3 when it comes out. Your applications running either on-premise or on cloud, wherever they happen to be, may not have been built to handle that. But the API manager has been, and it can handle all that security for you at that point, meaning that your services and your servers don't have to worry about that. It's taken care of. Now, you may still want to keep your existing security on the servers for things like the internal audit and logging and all kinds of things. But it's going to be easier for maintenance, for housekeeping, and for security if you centralize everything. Anybody disagree? A question?
There. So does the API management, if you centralize the security, still deliver IRIS roles to the application that were granted to the user, or are we getting, say, an OAuth token that we have to process ourselves and then log on to get the roles?
There's probably people in the room who could answer that better than I can, but I believe you get a token coming through. But Stefan's at the back, and he could probably answer it for you better.
So the answer is whatever the backend gives back to the client will also get returned to the client of IAM, InterSystems API Manager, right? So we basically just proxy the request and the responses. So whatever the IRIS instance or Health Connect actually returned be that the header or the payload is something we will also forward to the client unchanged, unless you reconfigure IAM to make changes. Does that help?
No.
No? Then
No, because the question was, if you're centralizing authentication at the API management, then how does that relate? Suppose I'm using, right now, if it's coming through CSP and authentication's happening there, then the REST handler is getting roles through that on every request. So how does this relate, I guess, to the CSP REST handler in terms of determining the authentication and the roles that were assigned when the user authenticates?
so it really depends on what security mechanisms you're using, right? But basically, you at the very least, you have to do security at the API management level, right? And then there's the connection between the API management software piece and your servers. And you don't have to secure these, but it's highly appreciated if you do, right? And you can just basically either forward whatever authentication you've done on IAM to the server so that you get all the same roles and the understanding of who the user is, or you use a more complicated authentication mechanism like, let's say, OAuth, where IRIS could be the OAuth server and IAM just acts as an OAuth client, so that IRIS in this case actually just returns a token, and IRIS knows exactly to which token it's supposed to load which role.
You pass through those headers? Yes.
If we're going to have a deeper question about security, maybe we should take it at the end. No, that's fine. Okay. Yeah. Health checking. This is the knowing that something's gone wrong before somebody tells you. There were two types of health checking. There's active and there's passive. And if we look at these, with active, the InterSystems API manager will be constantly polling the service to make sure it's okay and it's there. And if it isn't, then it will be marked as unhealthy, and it will carry on being marked as healthy until it comes back into life, which means we'll carry on polling it until it starts to respond in a way that we would like it to. Okay. With passive, what happens there is that we look at the response from the service every time a call is made, and if that response says server down, one of the 500 type errors, then it would be marked as unhealthy. The difference is it's then going to require an administrator to go in and reset it to say it's now okay. And there were pros and cons for doing either one of them. In terms of the setup, they're actually pretty simple and much the same, apart from slight differences on the active ones for the intervals and such like. But you give it a list of HTTP codes that you consider to be success, and the ones that are unhealthy, and then the system will go ahead and make sure that things are happening. Onboarding, which we explained was actually getting people to use your system. Trying to tell them about all the documentation, all the APIs, how they should use them, what they expect back, and so on and so forth, is really difficult. So there is actually, within the API manager, there is a developer portal whereby you can see the documentation for the APIs, you can test the APIs to make sure they work, and all that can be done before everything goes into production actually on your service, so they can test whilst they're going along. How does that all manage to happen? Well, there's something called the Open API specification, also known as Swagger. And that defines how you specify an API in terms of what it does. You can take your Swagger specification, a JSON file or a YAML file, and load it into the API manager, and it will automatically document and allow people to test using that specification. From 2019 onwards, you can actually load your JSON file into InterSystems IRIS, and we will create all the stubs for you. So all you then have to do is put the logic in. We will create the dispatch class, the implementation class, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that way, one, you know that everything is being pipe worked properly, and two, you know the documentation is there and that people can test, which cuts out an awful lot of work and documentation and people doing things. Okay, we've got less than 20 minutes left, and we now hit the scary part, which is me trying to demo it working, which worked okay earlier. Okay. Let's go here first. Okay. Since we don't have the full definition of the screen on those monitors, can you see that okay? Okay. Okay. Everything is browser-based. Everything goes through the browser this way. You'll notice that what it's showing here is the overall traffic on the system. And at the moment, everything is blue. If it goes pink, then something wrong. You'll also see that it's talking about workspaces. And basically, you can have as many workspaces for what you want to do. For those people who are familiar with InterSystems technology, think of a workspace as a namespace. It's somewhere where you can set things up and people do things. We've got one in here which is just default. And again, you get to see the traffic here that's coming in. I've actually got two scripts running that are just generating traffic on a fairly random basis. Okay. If we look at the services that we have one service on this system, and you can see here that it has the protocols that are involved, the host it's talking to, and an ID. Actually, that's going to be important, so we're just going to copy that because we need that later. But if we have a look at that, you can see that it's pretty simple to set up. There's not much in it. And if you look at the activity for this service, you can see what's going on. Okay. Same with the routes. You can set up as many routes as you like. And if we look at this one here, view, again, you can see the activity. You can see what's going on. And what you do is you tie the route to the service, and also with things like the methods, so get, post, etc., etc. Consumers, we haven't got any yet, but we will look at plugins just for the moment. But before I do that, I'm just going to kill these two. There we go. So, plugins. Okay, we don't have any plugins at the moment. Add a new plugin. And here's the list of all the things that you've got. The authentication, security, traffic control is the one that we're interested in, which is the rate limiting. So we'll go for that one. The service that we're interested in throttling is the one that we just copied. We could do it by route or by consumer. But what we will do is, where'd it go? We are going to set a limit, a particular selection on that, and we're going to say you're allowed 4 requests per minute. Okay, and we'll create that. Okay, if we look over here, the traffic has stopped, so that's okay. I'm going to go to Postman. For those of you who aren't familiar with Postman, it's a free piece of software that allows you to send requests. In this case, it's going to send REST requests. Every time you install InterSystems IRIS, there will always be this REST call, and it's for Atelier, and it's the API, so we know it's there, and we can say send. And if we look at the body, this is what the service has sent back, and it's saying, those are the features, those are the namespaces. If we look at the headers, you'll see it's fairly standard headers in there, and it tells you things as well, like how long it took to get there and back. What we'll do now is, if you look here, you see that because of that throttling, it's saying that you're limited to 4 per minute, and there are 3 left. We send that again, and 2, 1, and 0. At that point, if you look at the body, you'll see that you're getting API limit exceeded. And in fact, if you look at the headers, there aren't as many because actually the API manager didn't let it anywhere near the service because you've exceeded your limit. And it's the API manager at that point that stopped it and pushed back and said, go no further. Okay? Let's go back to the browser for the moment. This is the administrative portal. This is allowing you to set things up, to set up the authentication, to control the throttling and such like. There is also the developer portal for the developers amongst us who want to look at how things are done. And if you click here, okay, we're going to look at the documentation that we've already got. And here's one I created earlier. And it's a very simple call that just returns the date and time, and it's a REST call that I set up on the system. You'll notice on the right-hand side, if you can read that through the screen, it's saying, here's what you would send from JavaScript, here's what you'd do from the shell, here's Python, here's Ruby, and so on. And over here, you could test the endpoint to actually see what comes back. So it's telling you, I don't actually require any parameters for this REST call. Here's the call you would make. You can embed this in your application if you like, and here's what happens. You've cut out weeks of trying to explain to people over the phone or email how these damn things work, okay? It's there for you. To give you an idea, you can either, the Swagger editor is free and it's available on the web, and here's the file that defines my API call. You can also have things like Visual Studio Code that has Swagger plugins. Notice the word plugin again. And you can use whatever your favorite editor is to define these things. Okay. Any questions so far? If it's about security, we'll handle them in a minute. Okay. Just to give you another idea, apart from just doing it from, or if you do it from Postman, if you look at this one, this is the returning the verbose in terms of what comes back from the server for dates and times. You could embed that in this case, a CSP page. No, you can't because I exceeded the limit. Okay. We'll forget that one for the moment. Let's go back here. There it is. Okay. Okay. Are we up? Nope. Honestly. Right. So standard out of the box with InterSystems IRIS and IRIS for Health 2019.3. It is available on 2019.2 with an ad hoc release. And in fact, what I was running here was 2019.2. Okay. Will be available later this year with the 1.1 release. It will get ported onto there. Okay. Licensing. This is not something you often hear us say. but it's free. Well, it's no extra cost. You have to buy IRIS. Okay. This is a feature of InterSystems IRIS. It is not a standalone product. We are not selling an API manager. We are selling InterSystems IRIS, which has the API manager as a feature. We got it? We are not selling an API manager, but you can have it within the product. Okay. You just need to tell us that you want it when you order your InterSystems IRIS license so that we can modify the license accordingly for the API manager to work. Okay. What basically happens on startup is you start the IAM. Now, I should point out the InterSystems API manager runs in a container. It will always run in a container. There aren't any plans to make it anything else. Right? So it is a Docker container. You download it, you run it. I have to say it's dead easy. I mean, I had it up and running within 20 minutes. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was up and it was running, and I could get the browser to connect and everything else. And then I started reading the documentation. So it's actually, it's not difficult, seriously. And if no guy like me can do it, then anybody can do it. So you start the IAM container through a startup script, and it will then talk to InterSystems IRIS to retrieve the license key. Okay. And if it gets a license key, it's fine. It will start up and it will sit there running quite happily. Otherwise, it will exit. Right? So you must point it at an instance of InterSystems IRIS that has the relevant license key for the API manager. We have introduced a new user called IAM, and the only thing that the IAM user does is to retrieve the license key for the InterSystems API manager. That's it. It doesn't do anything else. It's got very restricted usage. But when the InterSystems API manager connects to IRIS, it says, I am IAM, and here's my password, because you have to tell it the password as well. Okay. And that's all it does. So going back to where we were, we have the Swagger integration, which means you can define your API's specification first as opposed to code first. This is a big shift for those people who've actually been programming for a few years. You know? Instead of actually writing the code and then trying to document what it was that it does, you document it and then create the code from that documentation. Actually, it's simpler. You know? It takes away that extreme programming feeling. There's a management UI, service discovery for what's going on, analytics, traffic control, monitoring, security, a developer portal, a lightweight core. Everything that you need is in there. Okay? It is easy to set up. It does have full documentation. I know that previously we have been at times criticized for our documentation. There's a README file that comes with it. Read it. It tells you how to install it and set it up. And if you follow the README file, it works. Well, it did for me. Right, so it really isn't difficult. But go to the InterSystems documentation webpage, you'll find everything on there. Like I said, it runs in a container. Okay, is anybody not used to running containers? Wow. Oh, okay. A couple of people. It's not that difficult, seriously. Talk to us afterwards about the best ways of doing it, but it's not difficult. You don't have to have InterSystems IRIS running in the container. That can run on a box. This is a laptop. I've got two containers running. One's the API manager and one is IRIS. They're talking. But you don't need to. Okay. It is lightweight and it is fast. Initial testing shows that we're getting great throughput and very low latency. And in actual fact, we're quicker than the leader in the Magic Quadrant. And that's not from a great box in terms of specification. But do talk to our performance team if you're looking at a high performance system. And you do get full centralized control over who is doing what they're doing, when they're doing it, and how they're doing it. Because you can throttle not just in terms of how many calls that it can make, but you can take it over specific periods. You might decide that the weekend's fine, but during certain times of the day, you want to chew it down. Integration with Swagger, also known as OpenAS, makes life so much easier. And there are lots of tools out there to allow you to build these JSON files or YAML files for Swagger. It is a feature of the product, and it's fully supported by the WRC, and it's available now. You can have it. All right, you need to buy 2019.2 or 3 at the moment, but it's there. Okay. And it will come for the earlier versions. If you get the chance, there are some other sessions. There's REST at Ease, Michael Smart's doing that. And there's another next evolution of APIs that Michael Brahm is doing downstairs tomorrow. I would recommend that you try and go to both, if not, or either of those, but whatever you can. And we have just less than 3 minutes left for questions. No, you can have security questions if you like, because Stefan is still in the room, I think, so that's fine.
Is there a one-to-one? Oh, I'm sorry, somebody else.
Here comes.
No.
No, I don't have a question.
Give it to the customer first. We don't want him asking questions back then.
Thank you. Is there a one-to-one relationship between the container and an IRIS instance, or can you manage APIs for multiple IRIS?
Okay, so can you manage APIs on multiple systems from one API manager? Yes. The only one-to-one relationship that's there is to retrieve the license key. So you could have a mixed environment where you have InterSystems IRIS, cache, you could have SQL Server, all kinds of things out there that have APIs, but manage them through the InterSystems API manager.
That was my next question. Great.
Okay. As long as it's an API and you're calling it through HTTP, and obviously REST is the word nowadays, you can control it through here. You just need to buy InterSystems IRIS. Have I said that enough times? You need to buy it. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else?
Are you sure you're not in sales? He is.
Right at the start it said, sales engineer.
Spin up more than one container for redundancy. Assuming that container goes down, then traffic, I assume, ceases.
Yes. I'm looking at the raised thumb at the back. Yes, you can. Anybody else? Okay, well, just before we go, please, if you could, complete the survey. We are uploading the slides and the video complete with feedback to the website, but go to the Tech Exchange and talk to somebody in more detail about this. For those people who are going to One Memorial later, I will be joining you. I've been invited to ride on a duck boat. It's been nice knowing you all. But thank you very much, particularly for the fact it's now 5:15. It's the end of a long day. So thank you for your time.